Even though it is never mentioned again, in any way, shape or form, the scene where Guts kills Adonis stands to be one of the saddest and most shocking scenes in the first half of the Golden Age arc. It is also one of the most important turning points in the story. When Guts was originally ordered by Griffith to kill Julius, he didn't show any sign of disagreement. If anything, he looked to be confident and willing to listen to Griffith's orders. This attitude is shown when Guts simply replies, "As always," as if this was how Guts had always responded to Griffith. So naturally, when he first enters Julius's room, without even hesitating, Guts quickly swings his sword towards him. However, in his final moments, Julius recognizes who Guts is, and when he lets go of his cloak, Guts looks down at him, as if he is bothered by what he just did. He sees a dark shadow of someone opening the door, so he instinctively charges towards him. But it is only after the sword pierces through the person's chest that Guts realizes that it is Adonis. Guts is clearly distraught by what he just did. He is taken aback when Adonis murmurs a few sounds. He doesn't know how to react. He grabs his shaking hand and says, "Hey." Adonis coughs up blood. Again, Guts doesn't know what to do. Adonis lets out his last breath, releasing his hand, as he slowly drops to the ground. It is clearly shown that Guts is visibly disturbed by what he had done. There are a few key reasons why Guts reacts this way. Not only is it because of the fact that Adonis is a child, but it is because earlier on in the same chapter, while Guts spied on Julius, there was a short scene when he remembered himself as a child, when Gambino was still around. As he saw Adonis be harshly and strictly mentored by Julius, he saw shades of himself in Adonis. Because when Guts was a child, as we all know, he was in the same situation where an aggressive, father-like figure really pushed him to his limits. He saw Julius as Gambino, and he identified Adonis as someone like himself. This caused Guts to sympathize with Adonis, but he tried to ignore this, as seen from the time he said to himself, "I can't be careless at a time like this." The sympathetic side of Guts is what leads him to be so disturbed by this situation, because essentially, he killed another Gambino, and straight afterwards, all in all, he killed someone who he saw as a younger version of himself. This is supported by the short dream sequence Guts had as he escaped the scene. In this dream or hallucination, Zod assaults Gambino and Guts, eventually stabbing and killing both of them. But right at the end, Zod reacts to Guts' death in the exact same way Guts reacted when he killed Adonis. In the last panel of the sequence, this Zod is revealed to be adult Guts. The fact that Guts is represented as Zod in this dream sequence is important for one main reason. It shows how Guts eventually came to see himself. In the first battle between Zod and Guts, it was clearly established that Guts saw Zod as the epitome of terror. In the battle, when Zod first transformed, Guts froze, sweating furiously, clenching his teeth. Through all this, he said to himself, it was enormous. It was terror itself. Guts soon labelled him as a monster. Considering all of this, for Guts to actually see himself as this embodiment of terror in this nightmare meant that he eventually came to see himself as a monster as well. This all leads us, the readers, and even Guts himself, to understand that he no longer possesses the innocence he once had as a child. Whatever innocence he did have, he had just killed it off when he killed this young child. After barely escaping the scene, at a time when he is emotionally and mentally exhausted, Guts looks for Griffith. He eventually finds him at the palace, but Casca holds him back. And Guts indirectly hears Griffith's speech he gives to Charlotte. Without summarizing the entire speech, Griffith essentially says that anyone who doesn't have their own dream isn't someone he considers an equal. At this point in the story, Griffith has a clear dream, while Guts doesn't. And he begins to question whether he ever was Griffith's friend to begin with. I believe that this speech wouldn't have been as impactful to Guts if he hadn't killed Adonis. As mentioned earlier, Guts was mentally exhausted in this scene because Adonis' death had left such a big emotional scar on him. But after hearing Griffith's speech, he realized that all of the actions he performed that night was just another step forward for Griffith in pursuit of his dream. Adonis dying meant that there was an open throne to anyone who could create a tie to the loyal blood, leading a clear path for Griffith to get together with Charlotte, which will eventually lead him to take the throne. This means that something which terrified Guts so much to the point it showed up in his nightmare was simply just a beneficial chess move from Griffith's perspective. All of this falls down on Guts, and for the first time, he really understands how remote he is from Griffith on a fundamental level. The emotional impact of Adonis' death, combined with the result of him overhearing Griffith's speech, is what eventually led Guts to question his own motives for what he was fighting for. Up until Adonis' death, Guts had no problems listening to Griffith's orders, no matter what it was. It was only after he killed a child similar to himself that Guts questioned the cause of his actions. In my opinion, Adonis' death was the most impactful death of Guts' life since he killed Gambino. Let me explain. In the amazing chapter, Bonfire of Dreams, Guts says to Casca that until he joined the band, he was fighting just to survive, that there was no grand purpose or some major motive behind him fighting from battlefield to battlefield. But when he joined Griffith, for the first time, he fought for someone else's dream, not for himself. This scene relates to the aftermath of Adonis' death, because unlike the time Guts killed Gambino, it meant that there was an overarching meaning behind Adonis' passing. Gambino and Adonis' deaths are similar in a lot of ways. Both happenings were done out of instinct, by accident, and both scenarios left Guts extremely shocked. However, the big difference was how the two deaths affected him in the long term. When Gambino died, it was all on Guts. As he said in the Bonfire of Dreams, before he joined the band, he was just fighting for himself. Meaning he killed Gambino just for himself, with no one else to blame. However, when Adonis died, although it did affect him mentally, he was no longer fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Griffith, which is why it ultimately ended up as a beneficial move. This led Guts to a dilemma. While Guts regretted everything regarding the action and consequences of killing Gambino, Adonis' death ended up serving a purpose. However, since his death still left an imprint on Guts, it led him to actually reflect on the purposes and consequences of his actions, rather than to just simply follow orders. Meaning for the first time, Guts actually questioned whether he was fine with just having his actions directed by Griffith, whether he was fine to just continuously put himself in harm's way, just to be labelled as a tool by his leader, who didn't even consider him as an equal. And I believe this was ultimately another example of causality. Seemingly small things eventually causing major events is a recurring pattern in Berserk, and this is no different. Adonis' death, combined with Griffith's speech, caused the chain of events which ultimately made Guts leave the Band of the Hawk. Adonis' death led Guts to search for Griffith, which caused him to listen to his speech and reflect upon his actions. This further affected the way he compared his own motives to Casca's, and so on and so forth. This all eventually led Guts to make his decision about leaving Griffith.